If there's one thing we've come to learn about the internet, it's that the internet loves a genius. Actually, scratch that. The internet loves making geniuses. It'll put you on a pedestal, cheer you on, swear you're the future of your craft, and crown you king. Then the moment something feels off, everybody suddenly becomes Sherlock Holmes. People start zooming into your work at 400%, comparing screenshots, circling pixels, writing threads, and making videos. And just before you know it, the internet starts turning on those geniuses it made. That's pretty much what happened to Ross Draws. For years, Ross Draws wasn't just another digital artist. He was the digital artist for a lot of people. If you ever thought about getting into digital painting, chances are you've watched one of his videos. Plus, if you stuck around long enough, you probably learned something too. Ross had built a reputation around his skills. No gimmicks or shortcuts. He just showed years of practice, ridiculously good artwork, and a teaching style that made drawing feel a lot less intimidating. So, as long as digital art was the conversation, people trusted his output. Well, until January 2025 happened. A document hit the internet, and overnight, the whole conversation changed. People weren't showing up to admire Ross's latest painting anymore. Instead, they were showing up with magnifying glasses. Within hours, artists and fans were pulling apart his work, convinced they'd found something that didn't belong. AI in this case. Then came another claim. Ross had allegedly been using AI in projects for publishing partners who had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with it. Suddenly, this wasn't just another internet argument about AI anymore. It was now about trust. Because if the allegations were true, then it means one of the internet's most respected art creators hadn't just experimented with AI, he'd conveniently kept it to himself while feeding off people's hype and admiration for him. But then, how did one of the biggest names in digital art end up here? Well, to answer that, we have to go back to the beginning because he didn't just become Ross Draws overnight. Way before the millions of views, the Patreon, the brand deals, and the internet fame, he was just a kid in California who couldn't seem to stop drawing. And that obsession with drawing eventually turned into a career that thousands of artists wanted for themselves. Who is Ross Draws? The truth is that Ross wasn't born Ross Draws. His real name is Ross Tran, and long before millions of people knew him for bright colors, giant anime eyes, and ridiculously satisfying speed paints, he was just a kid who loved drawing.
Industry, creating characters, environments, world, universes, dragons, and things for TV, film, and everything like that. If you're unfamiliar with my work or what I do, there are some links you can check out in the description.
You know those kids who'd fill notebooks for fun and didn't really need someone to tell them to practice because they were already doing it? That was Ross. His obsession followed him into the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, where he studied illustration and character design. But getting a degree wasn't the only part that made people fall in love with Ross. The internet was. You see, the mid-2000s were an interesting time for art YouTube. There were plenty of tutorials and just as many incredibly talented artists. However, one thing that wasn't much available was approachable teachers. Some creators made incredible art but explained it like they were reading from an instruction manual. Others acted like every trade secret had to be guarded with their lives. Ross noticed the divide and landed right in the middle. He'd paint something that looked impossibly good, then turn around and show you exactly how he did it.
Follow along. And tip number one is curves and color range. Yeah, these are two effects that I use to experiment with color and maybe change up the whole palette and feel of my pieces. Usually when we work on paintings for so long, these colors are baked into our brains, and so I just need something to shake things up. Let's use curves.
His videos weren't subtly hinting that his audience could never be that good, and he sure wasn't gatekeeping or stylishly talking down to beginners. He was all for showing his audience how to get it done and virtually hand-holding them while at it.
Or two, and I can inspire you guys to create whatever you guys want to create. Have you ever felt like you have these amazing, cool, awesome ideas that are just trapped inside your head and you can't get them on paper? Well, even if you are an absolute beginner or someone thinking about being an artist or picking up a new skill or something, I think I can help you.
And people loved it. His videos felt more like sitting beside someone who happened to be ridiculously good at drawing and less like technical lectures. Of course, people kept coming back. Consequently, one video became 10 and 10 became 50. Before long, Ross Draws wasn't just another YouTube channel. It had become a brand. His Patreon exploded and his YouTube tutorials pulled in millions of views. He had the attention of big companies that wanted to work with him. Brands reached out too, and book deals followed. From the outside, it looked like Ross had cracked the code that said, turn your passion into your job, turn your audience into a community, and turn your art into a career. It was every artist's dream, and Ross looked like he was living it. So, why then had he been caught in the internet's crossfires? Well, in addition to being the absolute big brother artist to beginners, every one of Ross's videos, live streams, and behind the scenes carried the same message. that getting good takes time.
Just don't think that our school is gonna make you a great artist. You know, only you can make yourself a great artist. You can improve anywhere. It's all about mileage. You can do it at home, you can do it at school.
Basically, he taught his audience that they didn't have to skip the hard part. They were to sketch, mess up, start again, and keep going. That was the whole appeal. He never came across as someone who was a fan of shortcuts. If anything, he made the slow road look worth taking. That's why so many artists looked up to him. Not only could he draw, he also made years of practice feel exciting instead of exhausting and made improvement look possible. And so, instead of seeing him as just another creator, a lot of his audience fell in love with his art and also trusted him. This is why it's easy to imagine how betrayed they must have felt when the accusations that he had been using AI right under their noses started. On the 26th of January 2025, an account named Bizul on X shared a 20-page long Google document that pointed accusatory fingers at Ross Draws for using AI in his drawings. The document was written by someone who went by Fennec Soul or just Flen online, a former community member who had gotten close enough to Ross to help him at conventions, teach him software, and give feedback on his prints and projects. Now listen, this wasn't just a tweet, it wasn't also a subtweet. This wasn't even a thread. It was 20 pages of allegations with particularly interesting cropped out screenshots. So buckle up because we're going through all of it. The convention issue? Anyways, the whole drama started when Flen flew out to help Ross at X 2024. And before you say anything, it was not a local convention. Fen literally had to fly out despite having 2 jobs and overtime, hours just to make sure his bills didn't die while he was gone. So imagine landing in LA, ready to work, and watching Ross bring in a bunch of locals who had never worked a single convention in their lives and pay them minimum wage without blinking. They didn't have to have a series of conversations with Ross to convince him to pay them like Fen had to do. And there was no hesitation on Ross's end to pay them too. He just felt comfortable paying locals. Meanwhile, Fen, who had experience, who had flown across the country, and who had already done a previous convention for Ross, had to bring up the payment conversation himself, several times, in writing and in person. And Ross's response when he did, "I can take you far. Excuse you, exposure? In this modern age? I mean, who does that?" Now, Ross has his version of events. He says Fen was paid $640 for the weekend, plus lodging, free merch, and a free badge for a whole other convention he wasn't even working.
And then I found out, yeah, we did pay him $640 for the weekend. We got convention lunches, dinner, accommodations, hosting that he asked for. I'm pretty sure I honored almost all of it. And, the convention right after, which he wasn't a part of, he asked for a badge to attend, and I was like, here you go. So we gave him a free badge.
He also admits that payment details weren't properly sorted before Fen arrived, and he took responsibility for that.
I wish we truly solidified business or payment talks before them coming here. That wasn't solidified, and they flew here, and then in person they asked if they could get paid, and I was like, oh shit, you know, like, this is really sensitive topics. I wish we could have ironed that out.
Okay, fine. Fen did get paid eventually, but the way it unfolded, I mean, watching someone with zero experience get sorted out without question despite the fact that Fen had been bringing the same issue up several times, that definitely didn't sit well with Fen, and we noticed that Ross conveniently skimmed over that aspect in his video. Oh, and Ross also floated the idea of Fen staying for San Diego Comic-Con the same month, unpaid. But he framed it as a vacation. A vacation. Fen's bills did not get the vacation memo though. He had roommates, bare minimum expenses, and had already sacrificed other bills just to make the trip work. When he finally put a number to what staying for Comic-Con would cost him, it was $830. But Ross's response was to rescind the offer entirely. And apparently someone in Ross's circle had the nerve to tell Fen that $830 was an egregious figure to bill Ross. Mind you, this is coming from a man who by his own admission was paying well over that for his own monthly expenses at the time he lived alone. But sure, $830 was too much to pay someone else for work they were doing for you. Make it make sense. Plus, it seems like nobody is talking about the dog situation enough. Oh yes, we're going there. Fen said that Milo, who is Ross's dog, had no toys, no treats, and at one point, an empty water bowl that Fen had to fill himself after realizing the dog wasn't misbehaving, but just thirsty. And when Milo was bothering Ross, the yelling that followed wasn't a light, "Hey, cut it out." It was a deep, low, aggressive register that made Fen visibly uncomfortable. And Fen's observation goes further than just one incident. He says we only ever see Milo when Ross needs content for Instagram or YouTube. The dog appears when the camera comes out. Otherwise, apparently he's on his own. Ross's defense was that he cleaned up the house for Fen's visit.
Owner dinner, and when he came here, there was like no dog toys for Milo, and like, dude, he has so many. Like, Fen was a guest coming over to stay at my house. I cleaned up everything.
Dog toys everywhere aren't ideal for a guest, so he put them away. Fine, maybe that explains the toys. However, it does not explain the empty water bowl. It also does not explain the yelling. But again, Ross was hush on that. Moving on though, we've got to talk about the biggest elephant in the room. The plagiarism situation. Now this is where things get complicated. Fen alleged that Ross's character Hollow, with its retro tech aesthetic, bitmap textures, eye motifs, and sprite companion, was heavily inspired by, or maybe even outrightly lifted from, a mutual friend's creative work.
Fen is commenting on Ross's new character called Hollow, saying that there's no meaning behind his scars and eyes, that they were just added by Ross because it looks cool. They also pointed out Ross's self-insert character Flip from his Nima project, who has a passion for cooking and has.
He also claimed Ross had to change his main character's original name after being called out for using the same name as that friend's character, Kid. And it doesn't stop at the character. Fen also said that Ross has a habit of hearing someone's idea, dismissing it in the moment, and then bringing it back up later as if it had come upon him like an inspiration from above. Oh, it also doesn't help that in addition to all of these, there was also Fen's project that Ross also miraculously resurrected like it were his. It happened that, as Fen said, he had an Atlantis project he was working on, something he discussed with Ross at AX, but guess who had the exact same idea after their trip? Yup, you guessed right. Ross was suddenly inspired to revive his own Atlantis project. I mean, that's impeccably crazy timing he's got there, don't you think? Anyways, Skill also mentioned having an OC named Icarus, and shortly after, Ross announced a project called Icarus. Now, these all look like small things individually, but when put together, it seems like a scary pattern anyone in Fen's shoes would have been right to run from. Well, Ross went deep on this in his own video. He said the character Fen alleged was copied from a mutual friend is literally a self-portrait, a kid in a hoodie that looks like him. And yeah, it does look like him. According to Ross, they were all just inspiration from his childhood memories, which makes a lot of sense, especially as he's a 90s kid who grew up with Game Boys, Sega Dreamcast, and the likes from the 90s.
My plagiarizing retro nostalgia from him, and I'm like, okay, retro nostalgia is a genre, you know, like fantasy and sci-fi, you know. I'm a 90s kid. I grew up with Game Boys and Sega Dreamcast, and like I grew up around this stuff for my new product.
Plus, after considering that his and this person's characters looking similar might jeopardize their art, since Ross had more influence between the two of them, he willingly decided to change his name.
And so, to protect the friendship and to keep the peace, I was like, hey, Beazle, I'm willing to change my character's name. And the look of relief on his face, he's like, really? I'm like, yeah, this...
And also for the sake of their friendship. He even said he would have celebrated Bizul, who happens to be the mutual friend in question, if both their characters launched at the same time.
Of Japan, and I don't want this to taint our experience. And I feel like we're friends. We've always found a way to iron out differences and have tough conversations. What's happening? If our characters both came out, I would celebrate you. I think it's so cool that we have a similar name.
Oh, well, Bizal didn't think that, and we now know that because of how much he's joined forces with Fen to push all of these allegations out. However, the detail that does not quite add up is that the day before the document dropped, Ross and Bizal were still texting each other casually. So, what could have gone wrong? Obviously, whatever had been resolved in Japan had not really been resolved at all, unknown to Ross. And the next morning, the 20 pages of allegations went public with, wait for it, Bizul's and Fen's combined efforts. Ross described learning that as one of the most disorienting moments of the whole situation.
The person think I plagiarized from, I was considering them like somewhat of a decent friend, you know, a decent confidant. So to see their true feelings about me after I thought we resolved everything was deeply...
Someone he thought was a friend had traveled to Japan with and even had dinner with the night before, and then boom, out of nowhere, was actively championing the allegations against him. I mean, you can understand why that must hurt. However, we must also understand why Bizal felt the way he felt. Both things can be true at the same time. The AI situation. Okay, to the main AI accusations that broke the internet. You should know that by January 2025, the art community had been at war with AI for years. Artists were watching their styles get scraped, replicated, and sold back to clients who no longer needed to hire a human. The conversation was volcanic. Careers were being disrupted. And right into the middle of all of that came the accusation that one of the community's most trusted figures, the man who built his entire brand on human skill and authentic process, had secretly been using the very thing his community was fighting against. Fenn alleged that Ross had been generating images or elements with AI, and then painting over them to present the final work as fully hand-drawn. He pointed to a character sheet for Ross's new book with inconsistencies across different versions. The weird oversized sleeve, inconsistent hair, and a realistic render cropped out on the left that didn't match the rest of the piece.
Grain of salt. There's also this painting of the boy character when you scroll down through the documents. Feels like it has some AI influence.
He pointed to the Alphonse print, where the legs had mechanical artifacts that didn't make sense for a hand-drawn piece and a realistic, metallic render that appeared to have been painted over. He shared landscape images from the book that he said looked nothing like Ross's established style. And then he added that Ross had been repeatedly asking him how people felt about AI, sending videos of creators discussing it and all that. Ross even went as far as paying for Midjourney. Oh, can somebody tell this guy that he actually knows how to draw? In case he's forgotten. Now, experimenting isn't the crime here. We need to get this straight. The issue is the fact that Ross, who had preached the gospel of figuring out your artistic journey as you go, who had one of the most enviable clouts in the art industry, was paying out of pocket to use AI. Makes you wonder if he lost his mind during one of those mental health retreats he attended, because this is absolutely pathetic. In essence, Ross was testing the waters with Fenn and waiting to see when the climate would be calm enough to come out about it publicly. And whenever Fenn sent him content about why artists hated AI, Ross left him on red. Even Bizol warned about the effects of AI on artists. So, why is Ross dabbling into something unethical when he knows it is actually unethical? I guess we'll never know. Just as we'll never know if Fenn's racism allegations against Ross is true or not, since Ross doesn't make mention of it at all. For now though, let's look at the dinner table incident. This one barely got coverage and it really should have gotten more. Fenn is black and Haitian American. So, picture this. They are at dinner one evening and Ross has seated the group by race. Koreans here, Vietnamese there. Then he referred to Fenn as a diversity hire. You guys, who gives out seats according to skin color in big 21st century? Everyone at the table must have felt the awkwardness, but of course, nobody said anything. Ross's video also said nothing about this allegation of subtle racism towards Fenn. For almost 40 minutes, Ross told his side of the story and very conveniently didn't even brush the subject of the racism Fenn accused him of. That seems quite telling. Fenn also pointed out that a dark-skinned character in Ross's book that Fenn genuinely loved had been progressively changed over time. Gradually, he observed that the very Afrocentric character who originally carried an afro began to have a lighter skin tone, more coverage, and Eurocentric features. The newer versions had covered her up so much and lightened her so significantly that she barely resembled the original. Yet Ross's side of the story conveniently ignored addressing this. The silence. When the document initially dropped, Ross went quiet on all his socials, which, honestly, is understandable. If I woke up one day and found that someone was hurling 20 pages of accusations at me, and all I've worked very hard for, I would need some time to process things. So fares. Most people would also be sent into their heads if they were in his shoes, so yeah, we get it. Anyway, Ross's processing of the allegations against him took about a month. So, for 1 month, Ross stayed quiet, and trust the internet to sort its own curiosity some other way. They began to fill the silences with their assumptions, observations, and personal biases until the entire thing took a shape that paid no heed to Ross's side of the story. Artists were still pulling apart his work. Fans were arguing over whether they'd been misled. Some believed Fenn outrightly. Others felt there had to be more to the story than a 20-page document. Eventually, Ross broke his silence with a statement he posted on X and Blue Sky addressing the AI allegations. It wasn't a response to every claim Fenn had made. Instead, Ross focused almost entirely on the one accusation that had spread the fastest. According to him, his first experience with AI dated back to 2022, when the technology was still new and many artists were experimenting with it. He described himself as naturally curious, admitted he'd explored the tools, and accepted that he hadn't fully understood how quickly the conversation around AI had changed. Ross also tried to put the scale of it into perspective. Out of more than 600 published artworks created over 16 years, he claimed only 5 had any AI influence. As for his latest book, he insisted that while AI had briefly been explored during the concept phase, none of it made its way into the final product. He apologized to his audience, apologized to the wider art community, and promised to do better going forward. For some people, that was enough. For For others, it wasn't really answering the questions they were asking. The statement addressed whether he'd used AI. It didn't say much about the publishing partners, the collaborators, or many of the other claims sitting inside Fenn's document. So, the chaos continued, and then Ross returned with something much more detailed. The return nobody was ready for. You see, when the accusation first came out, Ross's former assistant, Mindy, made a statement that she's now taken down or that is just currently unavailable to the public about how she felt during her time working with him. To Ross's credit, he didn't dodge this one in his video. He called Mindy a rock star, said he wished he'd done more to show her how much he valued her, admitted the raise he gave her wasn't enough.
Mindy was awesome, and so to read that, it hurt me, and I did feel for her, and I wish I could have done better. Mindy was an amazing assistant. She championed me, really was by my side.
He said everything was new and chaotic at the time she was working with him, and he was figuring it out as he went.
New at the time. You know, this was kind of like my first thing getting into it. I am pursuing my passion for a living and trying to figure it out. You know, we were growing. Yeah, we started.
He bought everyone lunch every day. He invested in an in-house editor. He invested in a shipping team for the Nima books. He was trying, by his own account.
I gave her a raise, not big enough. I invested in an in-house editor for the videos. I invested in an in-house shipping team because we had to ship out a lot of Nima. Do my best to show my appreciation. You know, I bought everyone lunch every day. It was, you know, a lot of moving parts. You know, it's very chaotic, and I wish I could have done better to figure out the right moves. I should have made you feel more valued, and I'm sorry.
But trying and succeeding aren't the same thing, and Mindy's statement probably suggested that she felt the gap between those two things very clearly. So, was Ross's apology enough? That's between him and Mindy, but at least he looked it in the eye instead of pretending it didn't happen. Again, he admitted to experimenting with AI. Said it happened in 2022 when AI tools were brand new and he was deep in a creative block and desperate for anything that might help him get unstuck.
In 2022, I made a video thinking AI could be a great tool. It just started coming out and a lot of creators and artists were looking into it. It's this new shiny thing that spat out art vomit. It looked really ugly, the anatomy was broken everywhere, but it had like some cool promise, you know, some cool colors, some cool texture. And so my video was like exploring, this could maybe be a great tool to get out of your art block, to make maybe compositions, to get some inspiration.
Said he later stopped, came back from his hiatus, and watched the firestorm around AI grow bigger and bigger. He naturally got scared and deleted all the content that he had used AI to build to hide his tracks.
Just being offline, and I asked my peers and I asked some people like, hey, what's the state of content these days? Like what's happening? Because I'm curious. Yeah, is it still TikTok dances? So as I slowly came back, I started to see this like really negative firestorm. As I saw this kind of firestorm get bigger and bigger and bigger, I was like, oh, this is too volatile, this is too much, and I backtracked and I tried to delete it because anyone that touches it seems like people like getting eliminated. And yeah, I was acting out of fear, you know.
Unprompted and with no PR statement prepared beforehand, Ross took ownership for his mistakes in his 37-minute video on YouTube. I fucked up, tried to hide it, and for that, I take full accountability.
Fucked up, tried to hide it, and for that, I take full accountability for. I apologize.
I mean, we'd pat Ross on the back for owning up to this and not trying to skirt around it till it blows over. However, his My Side of the Story video stayed silent on some specific and important allegations, like the publishing partners with zero AI policies, animal abuse, subtle racism, and whether anyone else's work ever went into the process without their knowledge. So, even though it's been almost 2 years since these allegations and his narration of his side of the story surfaced on the internet, many still run with the idea that he uses AI. And whether Ross realizes it or not, clarifying this would get a lot of people off his back. Anyway, if Ross's video was meant to close the book on the controversy, it didn't. Because, not long after his My Side of the Story went live, Fenn returned with another document. This time, it stretched beyond 40 pages and was dedicated almost entirely to responding to Ross's defense. Unlike the first document, This one focused on challenging Ross's explanations rather than introducing brand new allegations. Take the AI allegations, for example. Ross maintained that he'd only experimented with the technology and hadn't fully appreciated how serious the ethical conversation around it had become. Fenn disagreed. He pointed to private conversations, messages, and discussions dating back to 2022, arguing that Ross had been warned about the growing concerns surrounding AI years before the controversy became public. Size. This is a whole lot of back and forth at this point. Fenn also pushed back on Ross's claim that only 5 artworks had AI influence. He highlighted convention prints, Patreon tutorials, promotional artwork, and commercially sold pieces, which, in his opinion, suggested the number could have been higher than Ross acknowledged. The document also revisited another major point from Ross's video, which is about their relationship. Ross had presented Fenn as someone who wasn't particularly close to him. Fenn responded by producing years' worth of messages, photographs, convention work, and personal conversations to argue that they were far closer than Ross had suggested. Also, we later find out that the screenshot Ross had shared, portraying Fenn as a parasocial fan who was just begging to be fed and counting down to getting dinner from Ross, was all a lie. Follow the dates carefully and then read this screenshot. Apparently, the countdown was inspired by a video Ross had made about another fan who had DM'd him for 1 year straight and gotten an OC from that consistency. So Fenn counting down to day 365 was so that Ross would share some of his gay characters with him? Why, pray tell, would Ross put out that one screenshot knowing fully well that the message he was passing across to his audience wasn't true? Thoughts and thoughts. Maybe if he had maintained the truth of the story without portraying his relationship with Fenn as parasocial, Fenn wouldn't have gone all the way to reveal all of these to the public. Quite an unnecessary move if you ask me, but we're here now. So, whether people agreed with Fenn or not, it became clear that this wasn't a disagreement between two strangers who'd only crossed paths once or twice. By this point, the controversy had evolved into something much messier than a debate over AI. It had become two people presenting completely different versions of the same history, each insisting the other had left out the details that mattered most. To wrap it all up, now, if we are really keeping it a buck, Ross Tran made real mistakes. He experimented with AI, hid it, and only came clean when he had no other choice. He handled the payment situation with Fenn poorly, regardless of what he eventually paid. He never addressed the dining table comment. He never addressed the character whose features changed. And his return to posting before fully resolving those open questions read as tone deaf to a community that was still waiting on him. But Fenn's document also needs to be looked at with clear, unbiased eyes. He admitted his proof on the AI accusations is sparse. The screenshots in his documents show inconsistencies, yes, but style inconsistencies alone aren't a confession. After all, artists change, experiments happen. And reading both accounts together, the convention situation looks less like deliberate exploitation and more like two people who had completely different understandings of what their arrangement was and never put any of it in writing. The plagiarism situation is genuinely murky. Retro nostalgia is a genre. 90s kids who grew up with Game Boys all share the same references. A kid in a hoodie that looks like you is not evidence of theft. However, repeatedly lifting ideas from the people around you, changing a character's name only after being called out, and then presenting everything as purely your own creation is a pattern worth examining. And there's the parasocial dimension of all of this too. Fenn got close to Ross because he wanted to get close to Ross. We need to put that out there. He wanted the friendship, he wanted the introductions, he wanted the career opportunities that proximity to someone like Ross could provide. When none of that materialized the way he'd hoped, the frustration that had been building for months found its way into 20 pages of public accusations. Ross Draws built something genuinely rare online, a community that didn't just watch him but trusted and learned from him. They believed in what he said the creative process was supposed to look like, and that trust was more of the product people fancied than his art. As expected, when it came out that the person asking them to trust the process had been skipping parts of it in the background, the hurt went beyond just AI, but also made them rethink if they were getting what they actually deserved. Ross has taken accountability for some of it, and honestly, that's more than a lot of creators in his position would have done. But some things remain unanswered, and in this age of screenshot archives and communities that treat inconsistency like a cold case to be solved, unanswered questions don't go away. Whether Ross Draws can rebuild the community and trust he used to have depends entirely on if he's willing to answer the rest of them. This is Andrew Dobson. You might recognize him by his blue bear mascot, a cartoon version of himself that became almost as recognizable as the man behind it. For years, he was one of the internet's most recognizable autobiographical cartoonists. His webcomics, So You're a Cartoonist, reached millions of page views. He published graphic novels. He collaborated with major YouTube creators. His comics were shared across the internet, and his opinions regularly pulled thousands of people into the comments. At one point, Almost everyone in online art circles knew exactly who Andrew Dobson was, but that wasn't because of his comics alone. Over time, his name became attached to one controversy after another. From political fights to public feuds, he became the most controversial bareface ever. Eventually, the reputation he spent years building became impossible to separate from the reputation he kept creating for himself. He became so problematic that his brother was allegedly denied a government job because of Dobson's views, and Dobson had to wipe himself off the internet after the authorities went after him. So, how does someone with real artistic talent, a loyal audience, and years of online success end up walking away from everything they built? To see how everything unfolded, we need to go back to how Andrew Dobson's story started. Andrew Dobson, also known as Tom Preston, was born in the spring of 1982 in Spencer, Massachusetts. He was the younger of two brothers when his family bought a Commodore 64 early, and that quickly became the center of his world. Even his first words were load and run because of it. By his teenage years, he had already taught himself stop-motion animation using Legos and an 8mm camera before moving into self-taught 2D and 3D animation. From the beginning, Andrew saw himself as someone with talent. The problem was that almost every story about his early life also came with someone making things harder for him. Like, he was bullied heavily throughout school. At one point, he casually mentioned being banned from the kindergarten school bus, although he never explained why. It's strange that he never explained this one incident because he usually explained absolutely everything else about his life. Like, he described being jumped by classmates and given humiliating nicknames throughout school, getting picked on for being quiet and shy, getting laughed at for standing up for myself, getting beaten up, getting given degrading nicknames that still haunt me to this day, the hate, the anger, and the desire to kill all my classmates. He also recalled finally snapping one day and punching one of his bullies. Then, almost immediately afterward, he turned himself in. One time I punched a guy who was bullying me and then promptly turned myself into the principal's office. That's the type of person I am. Even this early, a pattern was starting to form. Andrew could hold on to a conflict for years, retell it in detail, and turn it into part of his story. But in the moment itself, he often seemed more comfortable retreating than confronting it directly. That became even clearer when he enrolled at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design in 2000. His first roommate, Adam, regularly brought his girlfriend over, and they were anything but quiet. Instead of confronting either of them, Andrew chose to sleep in the stairwell. While he slept on the staircase, a girl offered him a place to sleep on the couch in her room. The same girl went on to become his girlfriend later. But what matters here isn't that someone made things hard for him, even during his college days. It's that Andrew's solution was not to confront the problem, but to remove himself from it completely. And years later, he retold the entire thing as a funny college story. That same habit showed up again when he ran the college's anime club during that same period. Every week, he selected new shows for screenings that lasted from 7 in the evening until midnight. He enjoyed the role enough to list it on his resume. The experience turned out to have another villain for him, just like school bullies and his uncomfortable roommate situation. The problem started when members began mocking almost every show he picked, including series he genuinely enjoyed. Hey everyone, and welcome to Anime Night. I've got a really special movie tonight. It's one of the first anime I ever saw, and it means a lot to me. Instead of arguing with them or trying to change the atmosphere, he slowly stopped attending his own screenings and handed responsibility to an assistant. According to Andrew, that assistant eventually ran the club into the ground after taking over. So once again, Andrew walked away from something he cared about. And once again, the story did not end when the conflict ended. He held onto it for years, turned it into a comic, and used the comic to explain why he had been wronged. So he left college carrying a grudge against anime itself. For nearly a decade, he repeatedly criticized the entire medium in public, even though his older posts showed he had once been obsessed with series like Dragon Ball. But while Andrew was publicly distancing himself from anime, he was privately building an identity that was much harder to explain. Around 2004, he had already spent several years lurking in a Yahoo group dedicated to body inflation fetish artwork. The community focused on drawings of characters inflating like balloons. He later said he had watched the community for close to a decade before finally uploading his first piece. It featured an inflated version of Lena Inverse from the Anime Slayers. Within just 15 days, Andrew completed 48 separate requests under the alias Caddy N. The account quickly became popular, and it eventually evolved into Caddy Nebulart, a recurring original character who appeared throughout his fetish comics. Unlike most inflation artwork, which simply showed characters becoming larger, Andrew's stories usually ended with the characters inflating until they exploded. When parts of the work violated DeviantArt's content rules, he simply moved the uncensored versions onto his own website. For years, many people inside that community assumed Caddian was a woman. Andrew usually answered honestly whenever someone directly asked whether he was male. However, one of his own posts admitted that he intentionally played along with the misunderstanding at least once because he thought it was funny. He even mentioned receiving messages from people who believed they were flirting with a woman. Then the private persona collided with his real life. In 2007, Andrew explained on the forum bodyinflation.org that he eventually told his girlfriend about Caddian. According to him, she was immediately repulsed. Not long afterward, she found his popping popping artwork online herself. She came away believing the comics reflected an unhealthy fascination with hurting women. Andrew said the relationship never truly recovered after that conversation. Instead, they simply stopped talking about it altogether. Even years later, if something in a movie reminded her of those comics, she would quietly look at him without saying a word. And just like before, silence became the solution. Dobson did not resolve anything, he simply pushed it aside. I would beg to differ on that. I told my girlfriend with much embarrassment and she was quite repulsed by it. It didn't help that she went searching online shortly after that, stumbled across a lot of my popping artwork and thought I like to torture women. It's been a horrible strain on our relationship and I find myself burying it deeper and deeper and only coming out when she's not around, like now. I can honestly say that telling her was not a wise decision. That same year, in February 2007, Andrew reached a major milestone. He secured his first real publishing deal, marking the biggest step yet toward the creative career he had wanted since childhood. But that milestone also created a problem, because now the caddying account was no longer just a private internet persona. It was a risk to the professional image he was trying to build. Within days of announcing the deal, he quietly deleted the Caddying DeviantArt account. He later admitted he considered the account too risky now that his real name carried professional value. He barely acknowledged the persona again for years. When he finally addressed it in a short FAQ on his main website, he confirmed that Caddying had always been him. He then immediately asked people to move on. Looking back, this period already reveals a pattern that would define almost everything that followed. There was genuine talent and real ambition. There was also a growing habit of avoiding conflict instead of confronting it. Whenever his public image collided with uncomfortable reality, Andrew's first instinct was not to explain it, but to hide it until he no longer had a choice. Anyways, after the Caddying account disappeared in 2007, Andrew Dobson spent the next several years rebuilding his public identity under the alias Tom Preston. He published several books through Lulu.com, including The Big Book of Stuffness and Legends Volume 1. In 2008, he reached another milestone when his first traditionally published graphic novel, Formera, was released through the small publisher Altera Comics. It looked like the beginning of the career he had always wanted. The reality was much less glamorous though. When he attended New York Comic Con that year, he sold only 7 copies over 2 days. Most of those sales came from his own mother and aunt, who bought copies just to hand them out to friends. So instead of becoming the breakout graphic novelist he imagined, Andrew was still stuck trying to make the career work however he could. The graphic novel hadn't become the breakthrough he'd hoped for, so he continued relying on freelance commissions. Around that same period, he accepted a paid commission based on Metroid. The illustration took 4 months to complete, but viewers later noticed traced elements within the finished artwork. That detail would seem minor at the time. Later, it would look much more like a warning sign. Anyways, on January 1st, 2011, Andrew launched the project that would define the rest of his online career, the webcomic So You're a Cartoonist chronicled his daily life as a working artist. It mixed autobiography with humor and quickly found an audience. His DeviantArt account passed 1 million page views that same year. Around the same time, he also began a 3-year collaboration with musician and YouTuber Brental Floss. He illustrated comics that reached a much larger audience than anything he had created before. Here again, things finally seemed to be moving in the right direction, but there was something unusual about the comics themselves. Whenever someone criticized him, he never addressed it honestly. Instead, he rewrote it into neat little 4-panel arguments where his side always came out looking correct. It worked well inside a comic, but that is not how real life works. He learned that lesson in May 2012 when DeviantArt selected Andrew for its Fresh Doodles promotional group and flew him to MCM London, one of the UK's largest comic conventions. To celebrate, he created a poster featuring famous British landmarks and pop culture icons. Before the convention even began, he uploaded both the sketch and the finished artwork online. People on 4chan quickly compared his drawing of Big Ben to a specific stock photograph. The similarities were difficult to ignore. The angle matched almost perfectly. The proportions lined up almost exactly. Even much of the shading appeared nearly identical. Within days, musician Ken Ashcorp released a short parody song mocking the tracing allegations. The video switched back and forth between the stock photograph and Andrew's artwork while highlighting just how closely they matched.
Goes to sell them at conventions. 5 minutes in Photoshop. I hope you die on your way to MCM.
The clip spread rapidly across the internet. The worst part about this song, it's way too short. Grandfather will sing that to their grandchildren for generations to come. And suddenly, the convention trip that was supposed to prove Andrew was a serious artist became the thing putting his work under a microscope. On May 15th, Andrew posted his response. He acknowledged that people had located the reference photograph, but argued that critics had become obsessed with finding flaws in his work. He also claimed that any accurate drawing of Big Ben would naturally resemble other photographs of the landmark. But this defense completely missed the point. Nobody Nobody was saying Andrew couldn't draw Big Ben. The issue was that his poster appeared to match one specific photo almost perfectly. So instead of explaining his process, Andrew shifted the argument into something much safer, whether famous landmarks tend to look alike. With only days remaining before MCM London, he uploaded another response. This time, he filmed himself drawing Big Ben completely by hand using traditional tools. Here's my conundrum. If I redraw it on paper, what's going to prevent people from claiming foul again? Unless I record it as a Ustream and upload it to YouTube sped up so you can see me drawing it, I don't know of how else to prove that I am capable of such detail. Also, the stigma that I trace will probably linger on long after this settles anyway. But it also created a new problem. It proved the one thing nobody had really questioned. The issue wasn't whether Andrew could draw architecture, it was why the poster looked so close to one specific photograph in the first place. And his response still hadn't explained that. Ken Ashcorp clearly wasn't satisfied either. On May 23rd, he released a longer commentary titled Sins of a Complacent Artist. Ken's point was that Andrew had genuine ability but repeatedly chose shortcuts instead of using it. The creator contrasted Andrew with Andrew Chesworth, one of his former classmates from MCAD. By then, Chesworth had achieved the exact career Andrew had dreamed about since childhood by working as an animator at Disney. Andrew attended MCM London anyway, 5 days after that video appeared. A masked individual approached his booth and sprayed him with liquid from a bottle before running away. The person later explained that the original plan had simply been to hand Andrew a note reading, "This is what reading your comics feels like." When the footage reached Tumblr, it caused a mixed reaction. At the time, Andrew mostly described the incident as an unpleasant moment during an already stressful convention. The second incident was a hit and run. "I was minding my own business doing sketch cards for fans when someone pushed through the crowd, sprayed me with what I hope was water from a water bottle, and took off running after throwing down some manifesto of some sort, which I didn't even bother to read. So nice, wasted effort there, man." So that was the second thing that happened. Years later, however, his description changed. He began referring to it as a coordinated physical attack that gave him PTSD. He specifically connected that trauma to the fact that the incident had been filmed and shared online. The convention ended, but Andrew's reputation had started changing. More people now knew him because of controversy than because of his comics. And once that reputation started forming, every new incident became easier for people to interpret through the same lens. The following year brought another controversy, and this one connected directly back to a part of his past he had largely left behind. By August 2013, Andrew had openly discussed creating comics about controversial political topics because they consistently attracted more attention than his other work. On August 18th, he published a comic titled Asking for It. The strip showed a Power Girl cosplayer being harassed by a convention attendee who kept taking unwanted photographs. Andrew wrote himself into the comic as the person who noticed the situation and stepped in to defend her. The backlash was immediate. Many readers pointed out an obvious contradiction. Andrew had spent years creating fetish artwork centered on women being inflated against their will. Now he was presenting himself as a heroic defender of women against harassment. Andrew also repeatedly insisted that no real event had inspired the comic. According to him, the entire scenario came from his imagination and had no connection to any real convention or cosplayer. That explanation remained unchanged for 6 years. Then, in 2019, a photograph surfaced. The image showed a woman dressed as Power Girl comfortably posing for photographs during a convention. What appeared to be Andrew could also be seen standing in the background. So apparently, a real and completely consensual photo opportunity existed that closely resembled elements of the story Andrew had insisted was entirely fictional. That alone already made his original explanation much harder to believe. But the situation looked even worse when people realized the cosplayer's photo was taken by her boyfriend, not a harasser. A year after publishing the comic, Andrew defended it again. He pointed to convention posters warning attendees about harassment and argued they validated the message of his strip. He framed continued criticism as if people were defending harassment itself. Once again, that completely sidestepped the actual concern people had. Nobody argued harassment was acceptable. People questioned whether Andrew had any credibility to cast himself as the hero of that story, given his own artistic history. They also questioned whether he had been truthful about where the idea came from. By this point, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. In both cases, a direct answer could have ended the conversation early. Instead, Andrew built an entirely different argument and spent years defending that version rather than the original issue. In August 2014, Zoe Quinn, an independent game developer, became the center of a massive online controversy after her ex-boyfriend published a long blog post accusing her of infidelity and alleging she had inappropriate relationships with games journalists. The claims about trading sex for positive reviews were never substantiated, but they spread rapidly online. From there, the situation exploded into Gamergate. Supporters of Gamergate argued they were campaigning for ethics in games journalism. Critics argued the movement quickly became associated with widespread harassment, particularly targeting women in gaming, including Zoe Quinn, Brianna Wu, and Anita Sarkeesian. Andrew immediately sided with Zoe Quinn. Within days, he published lengthy posts defending Zoe Quinn and criticizing the controversy that had formed around the movement. In one post, he compared Quinn's situation to the suicide of actor Robin Williams. He argued that both involved people acting against their own values because of overwhelming outside pressure. The comparison landed poorly. Many readers felt he had stretched an unrelated tragedy far beyond its context in order to strengthen his own argument. But instead of making his point stronger, it mostly distracted from the issue he was trying to talk about. And it would not be the last time Andrew reached for a dramatic comparison and made the situation worse. Only a few weeks later, he made another mistake. He publicly blamed Gamergate supporters for an unrelated crime. When it became clear they had nothing to do with it, Andrew apologized and admitted he had jumped to the wrong conclusion. And for a brief moment, it looked like the mistake might actually change how he saw the movement. He even suggested that some of Gamergate's concerns may have been worth considering. But that version of Andrew didn't last long. Within days, he was right back where he started. Soon afterward, he returned completely to his original position. By now, Andrew had become deeply invested in the conflict itself. Every new controversy pulled him further into it, and the more involved he became, the less his account looked like the page of a working cartoonist, and the more it looked like a running commentary on the internet's latest culture war. The biggest turning point came in September. Andrew published a comic mocking Vivian James, the character that had become Gamergate's unofficial mascot. The strip portrayed Vivian as secretly supporting the same problems the movement claimed to oppose. Alongside her, Andrew included a caricature of a struggling college graduate blaming Wall Street for personal debt instead of accepting responsibility. The backlash was enormous. It easily surpassed their reaction to the Big Ben tracing controversy. Within days, artists across the internet began creating parody artwork that reimagined Andrew's own characters in increasingly hostile ways. For the first time, thousands of people who had never heard of Andrew Dobson suddenly knew exactly who he was. Don't you dare drag Luigi into this, Dobson. In typical Dobson style, he crashes and burns, missing the point. What an unfunny jackass he is. Go away, you feckless hack. No one wants you latching on us like a lamprey. Ironically, the attention he had spent years trying to earn as a cartoonist only came because people were mocking his cartoons instead. And once that happened, the conflict became almost impossible for him to step away from. On October 12th, after Zoe Quinn's personal information was leaked online without her consent, Andrew published a message directed at any Gamergate supporters who followed him. He told them to unfollow immediately. He described the leak as a line he refused to cross and presented the statement as absolute. The very next day, he apologized for how harsh the post had come across. Less than 24 hours after drawing a firm line, he was already walking it back. Around this point, even Andrew's online identity started looking different. Around 2012, he had already started replacing his human self insert with a blue bear in "So You're a Cartoonist." He explained that readers spent too much time commenting on his appearance. His comic version had looked much younger and thinner than he actually was for years, so the bear solved that problem entirely. By 2015, the blue bear had become much more than a character. Andrew briefly rebranded himself online as the SJW bear and leaned heavily into the identity. He regularly posted jokes aimed at white people and argued they were harmless because he himself was white. He also complained that people would not let him joke about white people, even though he was white himself. But the more Andrew made race part of his online persona, the more toxic those conversations became. Some replies crossed the line completely, including people using racial slurs against him. That was obviously unacceptable, but it also showed how far Andrew's account had drifted from art and into constant culture war arguments. People stopped seeing Andrew as just a cartoonist. More and more, they saw him as the guy constantly arguing about whatever controversy was taking over the internet that week, and his own Twitter account made that harder to deny. Andrew publicly claimed he only spent around 30 or 40 minutes a day on Twitter, but around the same time, his account activity was exploding. In early 2015, his account showed roughly 3,150 tweets and 760 followers. 5 months later, that had passed 11,000 tweets, close to 1,500 a month. And by April 2016, he had crossed 28,000 tweets total, while still sitting at just over 1,300 followers. When people pointed this out, Andrew argued that judging him by tweet count was unfair. He compared it to judging YouTubers for uploading every day, but that comparison only made sense if Twitter was supposed to be his main creative outlet, and that was exactly the problem. A lot of Andrew's activity was not new art, new comics, or new projects. It was replies, retweets, arguments, and posts pulled from political hashtags. So whether he was actually spending 30 minutes a day on Twitter or much longer almost became beside the point. It was that being online had become the work. The comic artist who once wanted attention for his original stories was now getting attention for arguments, call-outs, and whatever discourse he had attached himself to. And that same pattern started showing up outside alongside politics too, because around the same time, Andrew became intensely focused on the legend of Korra. More specifically, it centered on the relationship between Korra and Asami during the show's 4th and final season. Andrew had shown relatively little interest in the series beforehand. Hard to say really. Dobson wasn't even that big a fan of Korra in the beginning, and only really started caring about it mid-season 3, I believe. Once the relationship became central to the ending, he started posting about it almost every day. And in December, he also released a supercut lasting more than an hour. The video stitched together every scene Korra and Asami shared throughout the entire series. He also published an extensive breakdown explaining what he believed a full rewatch revealed. One detail appeared again and again. Andrew repeatedly emphasized that Korra and Asami were bisexual rather than gay. He mentioned that distinction so frequently, it became one of the things people remembered him for. Later, he produced a fully hand-drawn animation showing one character proposing to the other. The scene used audio taken directly from one of the show's voice actresses. Given Andrew's history, creating fetish artwork centered on women, many people found his intense fixation on Korrasami uncomfortable. That was a painful lesbian manga inspired to get through. They questioned why this particular relationship had become such a dominant part of his online presence. I just think of Dobson in one battle after another going, "You like lesbians? I love them. I love them." But Andrew's answer never changed. He insisted he was simply an enthusiastic fan and dismissed any other interpretation as prejudice or homophobia. By 2015, this was Andrew's biggest problem. The more he reacted to controversy, the more those reactions became his reputation. And because there were fewer major creative projects pulling attention elsewhere, every bad tweet, bad comic, or badly timed opinion started to define him more than the art itself. On April 29, 2015, Zelda Williams, the daughter of the late Robin Williams, posted about having a difficult week on Twitter. Less than a year after her father's death, she wrote that grief sometimes made her laugh and sometimes left her feeling completely lost. Andrew replied with an image of the female version of Marvel's Thor, which was captioned as "Calm thine tits." Unsurprisingly, this time, the criticism extended well beyond the communities that usually argued with him. Andrew initially defended the tweet across several follow-up posts by insisting people had misunderstood what he meant. Then he deleted it. The following day, he posted a brief apology confirming the tweet had been removed and admitting it had come across as kind of rude. But by then, the explanation barely mattered. The tweet had already spread and the damage was done. And this became another example of the same problem. Andrew would step into a sensitive situation, make himself part of it, then spend the aftermath arguing over how people interpreted his response. That same habit also shaped the way he attached himself to other people inside the culture war circles he followed. One of the clearest examples was comic writer Brianna Wu, another prominent figure during the Gamergate era. He regularly supported her positions in public and often referenced her work. The attention was almost entirely one-sided. Brianna Wu never followed him back. That August, one of Andrew's older comics resurfaced. The strip featured a man dressed as Slav Leia and was widely criticized as transphobic. Wu publicly expressed her disapproval. Andrew apologized directly to her and asked his followers to help correct what he believed was a misunderstanding surrounding the comic. A few months later, they disagreed again. This time, the argument centered on spoilers for Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Wu argued that extreme anti-spoiler attitudes had become irrational. Andrew pushed back by saying it felt selfish to expect people who had not yet seen the movie to simply accept spoilers. He also explained that he could not afford a ticket at the time. Afterward, Andrew described the disagreement as leaving him kind of bummed. Andrew seemed to take the exchange far more personally than Brianna Wu ever did, but this was becoming normal for him. By this point, Andrew was constantly attaching himself to internet arguments, picking a side early and treating every new update like proof that his side had been right all along. That became obvious again in 2016, when the all-female Ghostbusters reboot turned into one of the internet's biggest culture war debates before most people had even seen it. Andrew was already defending the movie long before it premiered, so when the first wave of positive reviews came out, he immediately treated them like vindication. Then, after finally watching it, he latched onto Kate McKinnon's character, Holtzman, who many viewers interpreted as gay. He praised the character repeatedly and even changed his display name online to reference her directly. But the movie itself did not become the victory lap Andrew seemed to expect. It struggled with both critics and audiences and eventually became one of the year's biggest disappointments. Even then, Andrew kept presenting the film in the most favorable way possible. And that was the problem. The movie was no longer just a movie to him. It had become another argument he had publicly invested himself in. So walking it back would have meant admitting that the people he had spent months arguing with might not have been completely wrong. Then came November 2016. Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. Andrew reacted harshly to Trump winning the presidential elections. He told any followers who had voted for Trump to unfollow him and described their politics as disgustingly hateful. That same night, he began drawing political comics about the election. It was the same reflex again. Whenever a major public event happened, Andrew processed it by turning his reaction into content. content. He also told Kanye West directly that no sane black man would support Trump. By this point, almost every major news story had become another stage for Andrew to perform his own reaction in real time. His Twitter account continued growing throughout this period. By 2018, it had accumulated well over 42,000 tweets across roughly 7 years. In May of that year, the account was permanently suspended following a coordinated mass reporting campaign. Andrew attempted to return several times through new accounts, but none of those attempts lasted. And even losing Twitter became another controversy for him to frame through a dramatic comparison. One of his final public comments about the suspension compared it to director James Gunn losing his job over old social media posts earlier that same year, but the comparison did not really work. James Gunn had lost a major studio job. Andrew had lost a Twitter account after years of hostile online arguments. Still, Andrew justified it by saying his account was suspended because of his posts against President Donald Trump. After losing Twitter, Andrew shifted much of his activity to Facebook and Tumblr. Not long afterward, gaming commentator Total Biscuit died following a long and very public battle with cancer. Andrew responded on Facebook by discussing his own mixed emotions. He specifically pointed to Total Biscuit's past support for Gamergate as something that complicated his ability to mourn without reservations. Predictably, the response was overwhelmingly negative. To a lot of people, Andrew had taken a moment that should have been about Total Biscuit's family, friends, and community and turned it into a post about his own history with Gamergate. And that became even harder to defend when someone asked whether Andrew and Total Biscuit had ever actually interacted in any meaningful way. Andrew admitted he could not really remember. So the backlash was not just about him criticizing a dead creator, it was about the fact that even after losing Twitter, Andrew was still doing the same thing somewhere else. A public tragedy happened, and instead of stepping back, he found a way to pull it back into the same internet war that had already consumed so much of his identity. By 2018, that's exactly where his reputation stood. In February of that year, a Tumblr blog, The Hypocrisy of Andrew Dobson, appeared with a title that left very little room for interpretation. The blog was trying to collect every controversy involving Andrew Dobson in one place, and that was what made it so damaging. None of these incidents were new on their own. People had argued about Andrew for years, but now, instead of being scattered across old forum threads, deleted posts, and forgotten screenshots, they were all being organized into one long record. Its creator began documenting Andrew's public history in extraordinary detail. Instead of looking like isolated mistakes, his actions now form one continuous pattern, stretching across more than a decade. For years, Andrew had told countless stories about his own life. This was the first time someone else assembled those stories into a version he could no longer control. And unfortunately for Andrew, there was not enough new work to change the conversation. By this point, Andrew's creative output had slowed dramatically. His comic websites disappeared for long stretches at a time. He had largely stopped pursuing graphic novels as a serious career path. Instead, he occasionally teased a mysterious new project. He described it as focusing on a black woman alongside magical creatures and, at one point, even mentioned the possibility of Muslim vampires. But no release date ever seemed to stick. Around the same period, Andrew completed a 3-chapter animated adaptation of The Adventure Zone, the popular Dungeons & Dragons podcast. The project showed real effort and technical ability, but it also focused entirely on somebody else's work. Meanwhile, his own long-promised original project remained unfinished. Even now, Andrew seemed more comfortable expanding another creator's world than fully committing to his own. Dobson can't even make a coherent comic. Then, in April 2020, after years of delays and abandoned ideas, Andrew finally released the project people had been waiting on. Now titled Cabin Rest, it abandoned the traditional comic format entirely. Instead, the story unfolded through what appeared to be a character's real Twitter feed. The comic launched as exclusive content for paying Patreon supporters. By almost any measure, this was Andrew's most ambitious original work in years. He had spent nearly 2 years developing it, and for once, it looked like he had actually followed through. But the comeback barely lasted a week. Pages from the comic leaked outside the Patreon paywall and quickly spread across the same blogs that had documented Andrew for years. He did not discover the leak immediately. By the time he learned about it on May 15th, the pages had already been circulating for roughly a month. And when he finally reacted, his solution only made the situation stranger. Instead of addressing the leak itself, Andrew raised the minimum Patreon pledge required to access Cabin Rest to $5,000. The move changed nothing. The leaked pages remained online and existing copies continued spreading. The only real consequence was that legitimate supporters could no longer subscribe. It solved the smallest part of the problem while leaving the largest part completely untouched. 6 days later, Andrew published another statement. He wrote that a small group of people will not leave me alone no matter how many times I ask. He described them as harassers and stalkers. He also explained that the constant exposure felt impossible to escape because it existed entirely online and almost entirely through anonymous users. To Andrew, it looked like proof that no matter what he made, the same people would always be waiting waiting to tear it apart. Then came the post that finally brought everything to an end. On May 22nd, 2020, Andrew posted what became his final public statement. "They win," he wrote. He explained that he would leave his existing accounts online only to prevent anyone else from taking his username. Beyond that, he said he was finished. He briefly replied to a handful of supporters before disappearing. During those conversations, Andrew revealed that he had been in therapy since 2013. He also said that whatever he was experiencing now had moved beyond what therapy alone could solve. In his own words, he believed he had only two options. He could abandon both his art and his online presence forever, or he could choose something worse. Either way, he concluded, the result would be exactly the same. They win, he loses. "I need more than well wishes. I need something physical and concrete to change. I don't know what else to do anymore." Whether someone agrees with Andrew's conclusions or not, one part of his experience deserves to be acknowledged. Living under years of constant scrutiny, dedicated hate blogs, and massive forum threads would be exhausting for almost anyone. That kind of attention carries a real psychological cost. Over the following weeks, Andrew disappeared piece by piece. His Patreon page was shut down and converted into a standard user account. One after another, his websites went offline. So, You're a Cartoonist, Alex the Pirate, and Formera all disappeared. Even Cabin Rest, the project he had spent 2 years completing, vanished alongside everything else. Most of his work survived only because other people had archived it. Ironically, many of those archives were maintained by the same critics who had spent years documenting his controversies. Without them, much of Andrew's career might have disappeared completely. There was also an unverified rumor that he wiped himself off the internet because his brother had been denied a government job despite qualifying, allegedly because of Dobson's controversial political beliefs. Not so fun fact, there are rumors that his family is the reason why he never emerged from the internet again. Why? Because his brother lost a job opportunity when his employer saw all his posts and comics threatening politicians to off themselves to remedy the situation. His family told him to touch grass. For almost 5 years, Andrew Dobson vanished from the internet. Then, in February 2025, something changed. A Blue Sky account using the handle @comics appeared online. Its first post strongly suggested Andrew might finally be returning. The account generated genuine attention after such a long absence. More posts appeared in late March. Then, just as suddenly, they stopped. Its final message described years of therapy that had gone nowhere and expressed regret over trying to return at all. For a moment, it looked like Andrew's story had come full circle. After years of silence, he had returned to the internet, tried to explain himself, immediately regretted it, and disappeared all over again. But there was only one problem. The account was fake. It had never belonged to Andrew in the first place. That may be the strangest ending of all. Even the story of Andrew Dobson's possible return was written by somebody else. People believed it because it sounded exactly like something he would have said. Looking back across 20 years, the pattern feels surprisingly consistent. Andrew clearly had artistic ability. He worked hard at times. He found audiences that many creators never reach. None of those things were ever really in doubt. What repeatedly held him back was his attention-seeking behavior in every situation and making it revolve around him. Dobson is what happens when a guy who can draw thinks he can make comics with no other abilities. For 2 decades, Andrew Dobson kept trying to protect the version of himself he wanted people to see. In the end, protecting that image cost him almost everything he built around it. He didn't actually leave the internet. He just inflated himself with so much copium, he finally burst. In the late 2000s, one YouTuber appeared to be on a fast track to online stardom in the animation and art community. His fans enthusiastically compared him to the Gordon Ramsay of art criticism.
And she's an animated storyteller, kind of like Cypher Den.
His commentary was sharp, brutally honest, and seemingly unafraid to call out anyone, including the biggest creators within the community.
Widowmaker and Diamond. But anyway, DaftPina from what I thought back then was like the Gordon Ramsay of the art.
His videos focused on critiquing fellow creators, exposing sloppy artwork, suspected tracing, potential scams, and even alleged online predators.
And including selling traced merchandise, domain squatting, and even DMCA takedowns.
He went so far as to share the specific techniques he used to spot these art crimes, which earned him a dedicated following that appreciated his no-nonsense approach. But something shifted along the way. What began as pointed criticism gradually crossed into more personal and controversial territory. Before long, he transformed from a rising critic into one of the most hated figures in the internet's animation circles.
Oh, that was horrible! Your wish is horrible! You're horrible! You're an irredeemable...
The backlash grew so intense that he eventually had to purge much of his online presence. Today, DaftPina has largely been erased from the internet. What remains are re-uploads of his old videos and reviews and dissections by other YouTubers. This is the story of a YouTube art critic who flew too close to the sun and fell spectacularly in the process. DaftPina, whose real name is Ryan Burke, was born on November 5th, 1997. He launched his YouTube channel in 2015, a time when the platform was booming with Let's Play gaming videos. beauty and makeup tutorials, and the early wave of animated storytime content, reaction videos, and lighthearted commentary were also hugely popular. And it was in this niche that Ryan decided to begin his YouTube career. In the beginning, Ryan focused mostly on reviews of cartoons and various random uploads. Many of those early videos have since been deleted or lost to time. But because they didn't land as many views, he eventually made a choice to shift strategy and rebrand.
I had made videos prior about cartoon reviews. It was at this time I started to make them over storytime animators.
He concentrated his new videos on an emerging niche, sharp art critiques of other YouTubers, particularly those working in the storytime animation genre.
And he is an animated storyteller, kind of like It's Alex Clark, Tim Tom, and the Odd Ones Out. But enough with the introductions.
The pivot made sense. Storytime animation was exploding in popularity by the late 2000s. Creators uploaded short animated videos where they would recount personal dramas, life stories, or internet drama. Because of how relatable it was to kids, the genre attracted massive audiences, especially among younger viewers, creating fertile ground for commentary and criticism. Ryan delivered his critiques in a trademark deadpan monotone voice paired with short, concise sentences.
The way he talks in his videos makes me think of a radio personality that is talking softly at night, just so his listeners can hear a story of his.
Now, on most of YouTube, this style often fails to retain viewers because the algorithm favors high-energy delivery, exaggerated reactions, and strong emotional hooks. But in Ryan's case, the understated approach had the opposite impact. His calm, no-nonsense delivery gave his art critiques a sense of dry wit and intellectual detachment that felt refreshing and credible within the often chaotic world of online animation commentary. Behind the scenes, however, laid a real personal tragedy. Ryan revealed that in 2016 he underwent major surgery to correct pectus excavatum, a serious medical condition in which the breastbone is sunken into the chest, sometimes putting dangerous pressure on the heart and lungs.
Around this time, my ribcage was pressing down a bit in my organs, so I went in to get some scans. I found out that my ribcage is a few millimeters from my heart and I needed surgery, or else it would crush my organs.
The operation was successful, but the recovery was allegedly brutal. As per his account, he was incapacitated for months, unable to laugh or even cough without pain, and he was prescribed the highest doses of opioids. While he eventually made a full recovery, he continued dealing with lingering mobility issues and occasional nighttime pain for some time afterward.
I couldn't sleep on my back or else I'd get a seizure from the pain. While I did get some at-home painkillers, I was advised to avoid laughing or coughing due to my body healing. Doing these actions would hurt a lot.
Balancing these health struggles with the demands of college life, Ryan's earliest critique videos received only lukewarm responses. They were, to say the least, safe content, more constructive and measured, with a focus on how creators could improve their work. They were nothing like the scathing, entertaining takedowns that would later define his channel and attract a much larger audience. This approach changed quickly. Starting in 2017, Ryan began producing sharper, more vicious art critiques. His tone evoked the fictional food critic Anton Ego from the Pixar film Ratatouille. Ruthless, precise, and unafraid to take on anyone, no matter how big their platform.
They might display themselves as heartwarming, charming, and family-friendly, so surely when you speak to them, they're all that they're cracked up to be. Meet James Rowelson.
He targeted prominent creators such as the Odd Ones Out and Jaden Animations. His reviews were often highly critical, not holding back on the tiniest of mistakes. He criticized technical aspects like backgrounds, animation quality, and storytelling choices. However, eventually, he went further, venturing into personal territory.
Only way of income, because she dropped out of college to pursue it. I think deep down, she knows that she won't get that far with making storytelling animations. And she uses her face reveal to do her best to cling to all scraps of fame before it goes away.
These critique videos, laced with personal judgment, performed strongly at the time, encouraging him to produce more. With each new upload, his commentary grew increasingly harsh. Many in the animation and art communities felt he had crossed the line from constructive criticism into personal attacks. His reviews began to feel less like objective art analysis and more like character judgments. A clear example was his critique of Jaden Animations. Ryan highlighted that she had dropped out of college and used it to argue she was lazy with her animations. He suggested this insulted artists who had completed their degrees while maintaining higher standards. He also accused her of faking her face reveal, questioned the authenticity of her videos about her eating disorder, and labeled her as potentially narcissistic and a manipulator for making content focused on her own life and achievement.
About 23 of her videos, she is faking a personality to cover up her deep sadness, and she may still feel awful to this day. She knows she cannot quit YouTube, as it would disappoint her fans, and since she dropped out of college, she doesn't have another way to potentially pay her bills and other expenses. Option B, Jaden lied throughout her entire video, and she only used it for personal gain. And from that video, she gained a few thousand subs, views, and even a lot of money. She is narcissistic, devious, compulsive liar, and manipulator to her fans and new viewers.
He dismissed her personal struggles as fabricated attempts to gain sympathy and attention. Additionally, viewers began noticing that some of his videos included uncensored artwork that pushed YouTube's boundaries, content that was age restricted but still controversial for the platform. What had started as art critique had now evolved into something more personal and distasteful. While this approach helped his channel grow, it also sowed the seeds of backlash within the very community he was reviewing. The situation became even more serious when Ryan began punching down on much younger or up-and-coming artists who were only just starting their online careers. In one particularly infamous video, he reviewed the channel of a new animator known as Chili Panda. Instead of offering constructive feedback, he bluntly told her to stop drawing altogether. He did not criticize her for copying styles. Rather, he claimed that because she had made no improvement in her artwork over the course of a year, she would never be able to draw well.
I think I'd just stop drawing and try a new hobby. I mean, maybe she's a great painter or musician, but just not drawing. So for Chili Panda's creativity,
the artist did reportedly leave YouTube around 2021. There was a brief resurgence with her making short videos in 2024, but that didn't last long either. But Ryan didn't care as much at the time for the consequences. As his channel grew, Ryan appeared to increasingly lean on this toxic format, resembling now something closer to tabloid-style commentary. His content shifted toward nitpicking the smallest details in big animation creators' videos and then speculating wildly about their character, motives, or competence with little to no supporting evidence. His tone often came across as venomous rather than helpful. Many felt he had completely abandoned his original goal of providing useful feedback to help creators improve. While the more aggressive approach brought him greater attention and higher view counts in the short term, it also kept adding fuel to an emerging backlash. Viewers and fellow creators began calling him out for embellishing details, making unsupported speculations, and presenting points in a disingenuous way. The mounting criticism grew so much that it eventually forced him to take action. In 2018, following particularly strong backlash, Ryan removed a number of his older videos. He also issued apologies in which he acknowledged making personal attacks on creators and stated that he would stop doing so going forward. That year, he reached 100,000 subscribers. Even after his apology, Ryan continued producing similar content, often with the same sharp edge. He released multiple videos targeting the odd ones out, with the most notable being the odd ones out, the hidden hypocrite. In it, he accused the creator of racism based on older videos, such as My Thoughts on Job Interviews, where the math students James tutored were all depicted as Asian with similar hairstyles and features.
In videos like My Thoughts on Job Interviews, where the math kids he was tutoring were all Asians with nearly the same haircut and slanted eyes. Noting the race of the kids didn't play a part in the story, it's kind of weird that he went out of his way to make them a stereotype. In the video Academy Anecdotes, he makes this joke a few times.
Ryan argued that highlighting their race served no narrative purpose. He also criticized the YouTuber for deleting old videos, claiming it was an attempt to sanitize his image and appear more family-friendly than he actually was. The Odd Ones Out eventually responded to address many of Ryan's points in a lengthy post. He particularly highlighted what he saw as DaftPina's common tactic: taking a small piece of evidence and filling it with heavy speculation to create the narrative he wanted. He also pointed out broader issues with Ryan's content, noting how he often twisted the truth, exaggerated situations, or omitted key context. Yet, despite the pushback, Ryan's channel kept growing. By this point, he had expanded his content beyond art style critiques, tracing accusations, or personal speculation. He began positioning himself as someone who exposed predators and problematic behavior in the animation community. One notable example was his coverage of Otaku Studios, which earned him significant praise from many viewers. Ryan accused the studio of several serious issues, including exploiting underage artists by commissioning them for NSFW artwork, failing to properly credit the said artist, and using copyrighted material without permission. He presented evidence such as screenshots, chat logs, and statements from former employees and collaborators. Later developments appeared to validate some of Ryan's claims when the channel owner faced legal consequences, including an arrest related to the sexual assault of a minor. This video series became one of the rare instances where DaftPina's aggressive style earned him widespread support rather than backlash. Now, Had he leaned exclusively into these legitimate exposés, he might have avoided his eventual downfall. But Ryan chose the low-hanging fruit and continued his mix of harsh critiques and exposés on both individual creators and animated shows. He saw no reason to shift strategy. His channel kept enjoying explosive growth in both views and subscribers. In 2020, he hit 200,000 subscribers. He also became more active outside his main channel, serving as a host or co-host on multiple podcasts. In August 2022, he joined the Pizza Party podcast, a laid-back animation discussion show featuring creators like Rebel Taxi and Jake Neutron. In May 2023, he and Solid J launched Bad Take Delete, a podcast focused on calling out bad opinions and controversial topics in media and online culture. Ryan thought he had hit the jackpot with a low-effort, high-engagement form of content, but little did he know it would ultimately contribute to the decline of his channel. In his pursuit of compelling stories and strong takes, Ryan began making outright invented or heavily exaggerated claims about artists. When challenged, he often refused to admit mistakes or provide full context. One notable case involved the artist Ethereum. Ryan accused him of being racist against black people and homophobic, despite Ethereum himself being black and gay. When Ethereum reached out to explain and share his side of the story, Ryan reportedly refused to let him respond properly on his platform. A similar situation unfolded with creator Antunes. Ryan strongly implied Antunes was racist and used only a small portion, roughly 6 minutes, of a 6-hour call to support his narrative. And, despite promising to release the full conversation, he never did. When Antunes tried to defend himself publicly, Ryan escalated the drama by threatening to release old, out-of-context screenshots involving Antunes and an underage creator named Puppy Chan at the time. These tactics, combined with a growing perception that his critiques were biased and sensationalized, began to backfire. By early 2023, Ryan's viewership had noticeably declined. Whether due to audiences realizing his critiques were not fully objective, other creators pushing back with their own response videos, or simply the oversaturation of drama-focused content in the animation community, the momentum had slowed significantly. Later that year, he appeared to have a change of heart. He deleted many of his most harshly critical and drama-heavy videos. In public statements, he announced that he no longer wanted to focus on drama or takedowns. Instead, he expressed interest in shifting toward content he genuinely enjoyed, such as interviewing artists and discussing animation in a more positive or constructive light. In a more personal video, Ryan offered what many viewed as his most sincere apology to date. He opened up about his mindset during the height of his critical period, admitting that much of his harshness stemmed from personal frustration and projection.
It was a vile video made at my lowest, projecting my feelings of insecurity and pain onto Jaden. I invalidated her trauma and what she was going through. It was never my place to talk about her mental health, and I truly regret not processing my own pain in a healthier way.
He explained that he had little time to work on his own animations while watching others succeed, which led him to lash out. In his own words, "I was just some guy out here with a microphone and camera while they were actually out there making stuff." He specifically referenced his videos on creators like Jaden Animations, The Odd Ones Out, and Chili Panda as examples of this misplaced resentment. The internet, however, remained divided in its response. Some viewers accepted the apology and believed his health struggles and insecurities had genuinely influenced his past behavior. Others dismissed it as a weak attempt to write off his controversies by blaming personal issues like post-surgery pain or college stress, arguing that it did not excuse the real harm caused. Many felt the apology was incomplete, noting that he avoided addressing several other significant controversies and incidents from his past. Still, a small portion of the audience saw it as the beginning of a genuine redemption arc, a chance for Ryan to move forward with more positive, interview-focused content and leave the drama behind. DaftPina was no longer his channel name. Ryan renamed his channel to Dove and Draw with a different focus, video style, and even how he speaks in his videos. However, on this channel, he stopped uploading about a year ago. Instead, he chose to start fresh with his older secondary channel, Extra Dovin, where he still regularly uploads to this day. But his rise and fall as DaftPina does serve as a cautionary tale of overstepping in pursuit of views. Had he just remained an unbiased art critic as he originally intended, he would still be uploading and finding success for his brand to this day.